Hi everyone, welcome to osquery Office Hours. First one of the new year, so also welcome to 2021. I don't think I have any announcements or highlights since the prior meeting. New year, that's about it. I guess first off, anyone have questions, issues, PRs?
What a coincidence. I have a question. I'm looking into the new unified logging API that Darwin has created, but it only has Swift bindings. And I don't think we have any way to do Swift easily with osquery core. And I am hoping that somebody can say, oh, no, of course we do.
So I know that CMake now has support for Swift because Swift is being developed with LLVM and there is upstream support now. I do not know what kind of binary you get when you compile Swift, but I'm pretty sure there's a way to do this. Not sure if we can get something that links statically, but it should work, I think.
I understand it should work, but also there's I have. Yeah, probably not an avenue I want to go down right now of trying to hammer out the best way to integrate Swift into the osquery core at the moment. So, okay. That's the end of my question.
Is there a question about like the build, or once you had it built, is there, I don't know enough about Swift and C++, like if you could build it, would there be a way to do the linking?
That is a wonderful question to which there are unclear answers at best and mostly negative answers that I can find online. Getting from Objective-C and C++ to Swift is possible, but you invoke Xcode to auto-generate headers for you to create the bridge.h file, it looks like. So in theory, we could do some really terrible Frankensteining of C++ to Objective-C++ to Swift and back. And in practice, that sounds like possibly the worst decision I could make for starting 2021.
I mean, that's a challenge, but I'm sorry, I got nothing. I would mostly defer to the other people on deep C build stuff.
Yeah, it's go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I don't have any deep insight into this, but we do lots of dirty hacks within the osquery code to make linking to libraries that we're not certain if they're actually on the system and that kind of thing, and private frameworks and that kind of stuff. So, doing things that seem pretty dirty is not unprecedented if it's the only option.
Yes, don't we have like Objective-C and Objective-C++ all over our code base already?
Not all over, but in a couple of the Darwin specific table implementations are there. But I don't know if that's going to make getting Swift in there like, oh, we've already come this far, what's one more step? Or this is, the final mortal sin that puts the whole thing over into unredeemable.
Well, I would expect that if there really is non-native API for this, they're going to only make this worse and add additional Swift-only APIs.
Yeah.
And we will sooner or later have to adhere to this new convention.
Yeah, we'll probably have to figure it out eventually, but I don't know that necessarily unified logging is the place where we find the need is so great that it's worth putting the effort in, or that we will encounter sufficient complexity that we will come up with a robust enough solution that will scale nicely as we keep going with osquery. And I know that I don't have the time to put in the proper work for this.
Is there any way to, maybe there's some kind of native API that is not strictly public that we can use.
Is this the OS log stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we already have some kind of code that we built from reverse engineering things somewhere. I didn't write it. I don't have much experience with macOS, but
Yeah.
I see some indication that there is OS log support for Objective-C.
I'll keep poking at it in that case. Yeah, I haven't found anything about that yet, but I'm also running right up against Apple's delightful documentation habits of as little as possible or less. Okay.
I haven't written any test code though, so like big grains of salt here.
Yeah. All right. Mostly I was just looking for if there was an easy solution for the Swift stuff, and if there's not, then I get to pursue alternate avenues of approach.
Speaking about Apple, it seemed like so Seth was mentioning that he may be willing to provide us with an M1 machine. We may also have one, I'm going to have to ask Mike here, that could become available again sooner or later.
So I have one on my desk, which is nominally for osquery development, and every month or so I attempt to carve out a little bit of time to build osquery on it, and then frequently find myself getting lost in dependency updates. This is mostly, I think, me. As I work with the dependency system, I get a little bit better at it. So no major criticisms of anything we're doing yet. And I feel like I should be able to spin up remote SSH access for the handful of people who are likely to want it for osquery. It feels like it shouldn't be very hard. The thorniest dependency I've bumped into so far is RocksDB, and only because I don't think there's been a release since they merged M1 code. I also don't totally know if we need to update dependencies. Like I don't know if we want to update dependencies to get the things the upstream maintainers think make it better on M1, or if it'll kind of work on its own. I was chatting very briefly with Ryan over at Uptix, and he says he's building on the M1 using their weird fork, which predates a lot of the CMake work. But I don't really know how much of that build is going through Rosetta versus a full native tool chain. So I don't know, but Uptix may also be working on it, so we might see something PRable from them at some point.
Yeah, it is possible we may have to update some of the libraries. But we do have some code working on the ARM64 Linux port. And if there were issues due to the different memory model, I would expect to see more crashes in there. So hopefully unless we have dependencies that are only imported through the macOS build, it should work. I didn't see any crash. Oh, we also had several fixes from Stefano during the holiday break that will certainly help against this kind of issues. We had some undefined behaviors lying around.
I don't remember if I ran in. Yeah, I feel like, sorry, I'm trying to put it back in my head. It's been about a week since I tried the builds. I think my impression was basically I had to go and define the architecture, and that would let for the various places where CMake has the config.h files, would let the directory structures be created, create the directory structures, populate the CMake.h's. It was pretty straightforward. I think the gnarliest one, which I'm going to end up needing to push to one of the CMake folks, is one of the Aegeus dependency hard codes Bison and Flex's path to user local homebrew. User local homebrew is not the homebrew path for the M1 Max. So I kind of did something ugly on my branch because I don't know. But I'm not sure what the right way to handle that is.
Oh, so they moved it. That's really good news.
Yeah, I have feelings about homebrew these days, but homebrew's stance is roughly user local homebrew is legacy, and sort of for what they're doing for the M1 machines is like user local homebrew is weird and might just be like bottles and thus Rosetta code. So like a proper M1 homebrew install will be an opt homebrew or wherever you want, but opt homebrew is the default for it.
I see. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be hard to fix it. Ideally, we would want to still hard code it so that we use a well-known version that doesn't change the reproducibility of the build. But yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be hard to fix.
Yeah, we can talk. Anyhow,
How's everybody else doing? Anything else going on?
one more agenda item that's been added here.
Go, go, go.
I'm taking notes as I go. Mike, you had a proposal here.
Yeah. Stefano recently retired a couple of, I won't say branches, subdirectories of code that had been created but not deployed. So one of them was the BPF approach, and the other one was the eventing subsystem refactor. Alessandro has done both of those things. Well, he did in 2020. Since we have BPF in 4.6, I wanted to ask if we can close that blueprint issue about BPF code. It was a different approach. I think that we had a consensus that the new approach is the one that we were going to take. So I was just going to put that out there. We can retire that issue.
Both this issue and the EV2 issue are blueprints that zero work has been done on, and we think the underlying problem has been addressed by other means.
Not zero work. No, there were EV2 is at least a design. I don't know if there was code for it, but the BPF.
Yeah, there was some code.
The other one had code. It just wasn't being built into the releases. So it was like an experimental thing. It was in the repo, but not anymore because Stefano has made a PR that we've merged that removed it. So yeah, the EV2 issue already closed. I think that one's kind of cut and dry. No one really, opposed it. This BPF approach, though, I just wanted to get some consensus here that we can close that one too. I know Alessandro is in favor. I just wanted to see if there was anything, because I don't remember if we used K-probes for the approach that we eventually went with.
We ended up using trace points.
Trace points, right.
The thing that wasn't ideal in the initial implementation of BPF is that we were hard coding opcodes and writing them manually, which didn't really scale too much. We do still have some work to do on BPF, and I would like to switch at least the execve system calls to K-probes to solve some of the some kernel issues we have found. Which reminds me, I was wondering if Teddy had any news on this matter.
No, I didn't. Sorry. My post about it just kind of sat there. I
Yeah,
expect that the sort of architecture bit is pretty rare, and no one's gonna have experience there.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try and open an issue on the kernel issue tracker.
I think it's fine to close this because the active developers are working on a different direction, and if we ever care, we can reopen it, or we'll go in a different direction, and like it's just noise.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, then that is tabled. I will go and close it out.
Since we are speaking about BPF, can I remind everyone that we have Zach talking at osquery at scale?
Thank you, Alessandro. And just to let everyone know, Alessandro has been extremely helpful with my understanding of everything that's going on. And I've still not convinced him that he should be giving the talk instead, but I will be trying to represent the work as best as I can.
Because I am bad at talks. You're way better, and like miles ahead. Your talks are interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it actually, and it's impressive how many times I write something and don't even see the limitations or the potential of the code until someone else, a really good user or another developer, just takes my code and uses it and tells me what's broken, what can be changed and improved. And every time it happens, it blows my mind. So I'm really looking forward to your talk.
Awesome.
And
Thank
buy the
you.
tickets.
You're muted, Alessandro.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I was saying buy the tickets. We're gonna have a link in the notes.
Yeah, it's coming up just a couple of weeks, right? The good news is they probably won't have a hard attendance cap, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they did. It's just all streaming. And I imagine all the talks will be available for streaming soon afterwards, like the previous year's talks were. My understanding is they're also all being pre-recorded and then played with a live Q&A via chat. So hopefully that will mean that they can get those streams up quicker.
Yeah. The ticket price is, I guess, just a donation. I think it's what they saw on the site. Not that it's nominal price anyway, but
I believe it's half donated or something. But yes, not pretty nominal price.
This is a really good thing about this lockdown. The only good thing about this huge lockdown, finally, I am able to easily go to conferences without moving like half a planet.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And hey, Trail of Bits folks, when you want to put on and Collide, you want to put on QueryCon again in New York, I'm in. I love New York and I love QueryCon.
yeah, putting it on is learning experience. I guess the second time around it won't be as hard. Yeah.
Believe in taking it has said similar, yes.
I've heard such things from everyone who's done that. Well, your work is well appreciated. This is just a fan letting you know that I'd love to see it happen again.
All right. Nice.
Hey, I had a question about the BPF, the work and the talk. Where is the sort of like getting started guide for the sort of the casual interested person? So I haven't gone and looked, but like do we feel comfortable that we have the right documentation and sort of the right sort of links out there and headlines to guide people who are curious about BPF and process auditing and whatnot to osquery?
So for one of the reasons I wanted to write a library to handle this was that I wanted people to just easily enter the code base and additional system calls in the same way as audit system with just a couple of lines of code. Of course, the library only handles well-formed and simple functions. So it's just a function tracing library. So if you were going to have to do special things like tracing the middle of the code or only checking for signal trace points without the enter and exit joining mechanism, you are going to have to write the assembly on your own. But compared to the old ways of the previous BPF code we had, this works with the LLVM IR language. So the good news is that you can easily take one of the LLVM tutorials. The most known one is the Kaleidoscope tutorial that teaches the reader to implement a lexer, a parser, and then your own language by using the LLVM library. So I feel like for adding system calls or user mode functions is straightforward. We can probably write a small page that shows how to do this. For more complex tracing, we do have the primitives to handle things like BPF maps, perf outputs, and so on, which can be easily reused. But they will have to look into the LLVM documentation. All the BPF details are mostly already handled either in the function tracing library or in the BPF utilities library.
That's awesome. You answered a completely different question. You answered it.
I'm sorry,
but I'm interested from the perspective
The
of
operator's point of
security
view.
practitioner. Yeah, the operator.
Oh, I see.
I actually want
Yeah.
to. Yeah, I think there are two things. One of them is the security practitioner / osquery site admin / person who's like, what can I do and what tables can I query? And then the other one is someone who might want to write a table, because I think a chunk of our eBPF support is about making it possible to write new tables more than making it possible to run arbitrary eBPF programs inside osquery from like a configuration standpoint. Alessandro, please correct me, of course.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't understand the question, sorry. But yeah, that's true. It's we can easily implement support for generating probes at runtime. So you could have a configuration file that tells osquery, look, trace this function in this library. This function is binary or this system call with these parameters, and then, I don't know, print them somewhere. But it's not yet implemented. As I've said, the focus was on helping developers write new tables.
And I mean, I think that everything that Alessandro described is important and it's needed, and so I'm glad that there are some plans for how we're going to get there, because I think that right now we have almost no documentation on how to implement BPF. But to answer Ted's question, I mean, I just looked at this as kind of a naive operator because it's all pretty new to me. And what we do have is documentation for what flags you need to turn on and what tables that activates. within I think it's it's like the main events page. I'm not sure that there's a good overview as to like why you'd choose BPF over audit, for example, and maybe adding some more context around that could be quite helpful. But just from like the mechanics of it, it's there. Like there's just a couple of flags you enable, and that's it. If you have a new enough kernel, it just works, or it did in my experience. I don't know if Alessandro has anything else to add.
Yeah, I guess that some of the things I've been documenting to you, Zach, are worth noting in the documentation, like advantage of being able to keep auditd running when switching to BPF and things like that. So yeah, we should make a new pull request to update the documentation.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, BPF itself was originally just to keep audit running. We had many customers that just couldn't use the events because, for example, SE Linux requires the auditd log to be in place if you want to use things like audit to allow and so on. And without this log, with osquery running, it's practically impossible to manage these systems.
That's awesome, and that's actually beyond what I was even thinking of too. Like a paragraph or two that explains why you would choose one or the other. Like I wasn't even thinking about that. And then the use case you just described, you want to keep audit running. And then in the reverse, like why would you want to use audit over eBPF? The simple answer that I have is just like you have an older kernel.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing on your machine, the performances may vary. The trouble is that with audit, we get a lot of information for free. Most notably, the file descriptor to path translation, thanks to the audit path records.
Sure.
While with BPF, we have to trace additional system calls that create and duplicate and destroy file descriptors. So while BPF is easier on resources on its own, we do have to do additional work in osquery. So this doesn't always apply.
Makes sense.
It will certainly use more memory. And I think this is something I documented the page. That kind of sucks. The more cores you have, the more memory you will use.
I mean, I will say in my testing that I've done, I didn't notice any significant memory issues, but when profiling something that essentially like forks and execs a bunch of like no-op processes like bin echo, I was able to get like 25% or maybe it was 33% more processes running per second or whatever using the audit implementation versus using the BPF implementation. And furthermore, with BPF, osquery used substantially more CPU. So I think that we need to we're gonna need to like understand this better and understand maybe under more realistic workloads what those kind of impacts look like. And then presumably, since we're in the earliest stages of this, there are plenty of things that we can do to optimize this better. But I think it's important to be aware of those trade-offs at this point.
Was this with the default configuration?
Yes.
I see. So it is worth trying with by allowing BPF to lock more memory. The reason that we have, the default settings are really limited, and I would expect osquery to lose events. The reason we're using this value is that Mike has discovered that the VMware Fusion hypervisor, whenever you create a virtual machine by default, has this CPU hot plugging setting enabled that will cause the virtual machine to report 128 possible cores, which is a pain because whenever you use perf event output and per CPU BPF maps, you are going to have to allocate one ring buffer per CPU. So in an effort to keep osquery running even in this kind of virtual machine, we decided to lower the memory settings as much as possible.
It's a tough
So
trade-off.
Alessandro, is that memory configurable through flags?
Yes, we have exported pretty much everything through the flags.
Okay.
There's in the documentation we also have some small math that shows how to estimate how much memory you will use based on amount of cores.
Got it. So I mean, I think that these are probably things that these are definitely things that I'll look into now, and then maybe I can make some recommendations as to where the defaults might go and enhance the documentation for folks to understand this better. And further, I'm realizing now that it's possible that there were actually just as many or more execs being carried out, but osquery was just dropping those events. So I'll need to look into that, and then I'll follow up with you offline because I'm keenly interested in understanding all this stuff.
Alessandro, you said some of the performance came because you had to fetch additional data that auditd provides.
Yeah.
What was the data?
Yeah, mostly file descriptors. So let's say that you encounter an XVE that has the FD parameter. It means that you will have to use the FD parameter to fetch the directory, and then use the relative path you're given to locate the binary. Now with audit, whenever there is an FD descriptor passed to the system call, audit automatically adds a new audit record, the audit path that translates the FD to the path.
Do you think there are likely usages of this that don't care about resolving file descriptors? And does it make sense to sort of allow people to run this in with or without, sort of making that more data versus CPU trade-off? Or is that just too complicated?
So we can easily do this. However, the problem we have is that whenever you execute a binary that is not an absolute path, we have to do the translation. Otherwise, we don't know what we are running, because that will depend possibly on the file descriptor and or the current working directory. And the working directory is another interesting bit. You can change that either with a string, which can also be a relative path, or with a file descriptor again. And that is why we have to implement translation. And the translation this is something we already have similar in the process file events. So when osquery starts, we take a snapshot through procfs. And then whenever a program opens or closes the file descriptors, we update our shadow copy of it. And when you fork and execve, we update it and inherit so we can keep it around. So that's why we have to trace so many system calls.
Okay. Maybe it doesn't make sense to not resolve it.
I mean, we could try a demo for this. I'm not sure how useful it is, as running path using running binaries using relative paths is not that uncommon. It's something like I don't know, in Bash, you launch a script or a program from the directory, and unless you have the path, you won't be able to see whether you're running a binary that happens to be named like a system binary or a binary that has been tampered with, maybe. That's the biggest issue. I mean, there are some things we can do to make this more lightweight. We probably have to come up with a roadmap on how to implement these performance mitigations.
Do we have actual reports from the field that the performance is a problem? Like, because it's easy to say that hypothetically it's a problem when you're talking about executing as many no-op programs per second as you can, right? But like, it doesn't translate into being a real-world problem.
Agreed that and I think that you guys at Trail of Bits are probably most able to answer that question. And if the answer is no, then it's, with the contrived profiling that I'm doing is just not as relevant.
We did use it. We didn't install it in production yet. So yeah, I mean, we felt that the performances were acceptable, at least for a first version. And yeah, I mean, this is actually not the first version. It's actually the third or fourth version between all the changes we made to the library and the initial integration.
I guess I think my takeaway then is like, until we hear real world problems, then, if y'all think it's a reasonable trade-off, then like, cool, it's a reasonable trade-off. And like, until someone's having issues, like, it's probably fine.
I'm full expecting people to open bug reports telling me how broken it is, and I didn't notice, and I will frankly try to fix it. But for the time being, it seems okay-ish.
I mean, right? Compare it to like selecting the users table on macOS, which like takes real time on a wall clock. Like, there's any number of things. Sounds like that's everything on BPF. Mike, I think, is suggesting that 4.6 can move out of pre-release to release.
I guess it's more of a question than a suggestion.
I haven't actually pushed it out. I don't think I've pushed it out to the Collide fleet. Let me double check. Maybe I did. Like, I'm not as on top of things as I was last February. Yeah, I don't think I've pushed 4.6.0 to the Collide test fleet, so I don't know if other people have pushed it out to test environments or not.
Is there anything like in your way of pushing that out to the test environment? I think in the past, you've given us pretty good confidence reassurance that nothing breaks after you do that. So I'd like to wait until you have that chance, and then we'll just hit the release button or hit the stable button.
I mean, some caveats here, right? Collide's test fleet is not very big. And mostly I didn't get to it because I was pushing launcher releases around, and I like to not do too many updates at the same time. It tends to confuse clients.
Cool.
So, I guess speaking of random launcher updates, I don't think we've seen any M1 crashes since I've pushed universal binaries in launcher. So osquery is still running through Rosetta, but haven't seen any crashes there yet.
Oh, great!
Silver lining.
That's nice to hear. It sounded like it's going to be a real pain for you if it continued.
Yeah, would not have enjoyed. It was bad enough getting launcher built universally. You know, for the real curious ones, you can go look at launcher's make file. It's got all the secret commands to make universal binaries.
Oh yeah, when we release the new version, we should also update the ARM64 binaries. I'm not sure if we have to regenerate them or we are happy with what we have. Windows was just updated with build settings, right?
Yeah, we didn't cut a release. Nick and maybe Teddy just did a new build for it.
Yeah, it's just a new build, and that should be on the website right now. New build for Windows. So we added a revision section to the release, so it's 4.6.0.2 on Windows. On Mac OS, it's just 4.6.0, and on all the Linux, it's 4.6.0-1.
Yeah, I'll try and get 4.6.0 out to our beta hosts today. I'm pretty sure I can do that.
Are the ARM packages still located in the Facebook bucket?
No, those we don't have a Facebook bucket anymore. It's just the osquery org bucket.
I see. So we can write to it without having to bother you every time, right?
Yes, right now you just
bother
have
me.
to bother Seth.
Okay. Yeah, I will make the pull request to update the ARM post with the new links, and then somehow we can update the packages.
Yeah, Seth has some documentation for how to create the account, and then to use IMA to provision yourself an account in a user in the account that manages the storage. I followed it and was able to like understand a little bit. I'm not sure, Seth, if we followed up with our sort of chat about the nuance of doing that. Okay, I'll try to do that.
We have done nothing wrong, I think, but like this is definitely a bit of a unloved corner of our world. One of the things I'm trying to do is I'm slowly trying to figure out better CDN hosting for our downloads because those are expensive.
Cool.
So those may suddenly move to somewhere like Fastly or Cloudflare if I can convince either of them to give us free CDN backing.
Nice. The hypothesis there is that they just charge less than AWS.
My hypothesis is that either one of them will be simpler to get a free account out of than to like try and keep asking for AWS credit. Like,
makes sense. Yeah.
I'm flabbergasted Fastly hasn't replied to me, actually. And I'm sort of loath to go hit up Cloudflare, but I might do that if I can't get anything out of Fastly.
Nice. Yeah.
Both of them have open source programs. They're both relatively small. They both use osquery. Like, you know, the amount of downloads that we need is a drop in the bucket to either one of them. So I can't see either one of them saying no if, you know, it actually gets to the right desk. That's everything I've got on the agenda. Anyone want to bring up anything? Want to call it a couple minutes early?
Let's see, what do we have going on? What are the longer term things? CI moving to GitHub. I don't think we've taken any action there. I think that's still on the docket, though. We want to move away from Azure to GitHub Actions. And then publishing packages automatically through CI hinges on that change to GitHub Actions, as well as getting ARM64 build hosts.
They're a little split, and this is kind of up to us as maintainers of the project. GitHub Actions and Azure can certainly coexist. I don't know how easily they can share data between each other, but if we said, oh, it's easier to do a full CI run on, Azure, and then we can do a build when release happens in GitHub, we could do that. I don't know if that will ultimately be easier or more confusing or just a viable transition step for us. So,
yeah, I think, if we could stick with Azure and solve all the problems we have right now, but if we ultimately want to move everything over to GitHub Actions, I think we should explore that first and then just move in a linear path.
That seems fine. I mean, my biggest, so Azure works, which is pretty cool. And other people have taken care of it, which is also pretty cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trail Bits. Thank you, Stefano. Yeah. The things that seem hard about Azure is that we don't own it, right? So kind of Trail of Bits does, and that's cool. Trail of Bits is great, right? But there's a little bit of a dance that always happens there. That's probably the biggest problem. I looked at setting one up for osquery, and it ended in tears. It was not good. And that might be me, or it might be just Microsoft, or it might be both of us. I don't know. Azure is not a happy place for me. Seth is not a good Microsoft person.
I think there are other pros to GitHub Actions, so we can start entangling our repos a little bit more. So if you can imagine, we press the release button and then the website updates too and automatically publishes. So just a little bit more automation there, which we can also do in Azure, but it's just, it would be a bit more overhead for us to put that all together. Mm-hmm. Versus my hope and sort of what I've seen from demonstrations of GitHub Actions is a bit more natural. But yeah, the sort of giving them some time to iron out some of the kinks that you experienced. We should maybe revisit that and see if you hit the same sort of.
I'm trying to remember. So the stuff on Azure, I'm sure I'll hit the same problems. My problems with Azure were just so how many people here have signed up for AWS accounts or managed an AWS thing, right? You're not as a user, right? As an organization, right? You're I'm in an organization. They go, cool, have an organization account. And you go, great. Let me go into IAM. I'll create some users. I'll do some stuff. It's it's complicated because AWS has 7,000 things, but it's straightforward, right? I can't figure out how to do that in Azure. I go to Azure and I'm
don't even try. I tried. And it tried to take over my GitHub account, and then I wasn't able to take it off. And it's
weird. It starts by saying, "What's your Active Directory subscription?" And I go, "I just want some compute resources." And they go,
"You have a valid Office license."
And it's just Azure is really weirdly oriented around if you ever administered a Windows 2000 machine through one of the server administration things, it all looks like that. And it's just what's your Active Directory license? And how many users are you signing up for? And I'm what? Just give me an EC2 node? And then the Azure pipelines aren't even part of Azure. They're part of Azure DevOps. And it's just even weirder. It's like if you sign up for like a free Eventbrite account, right? And it's like just linked to your personal identity and there's nothing, and like maybe you can invite someone in. It felt like that. I was like, is there any organizational structure? Like, how do these things connect? Is there only one OS query, or like can anyone create a random team named OS query? And like, how does any of this work? It was terrible for me.
I know that 3 people from us ended up having a duplicated account on Azure built on the same email address, which is super confusing. And
I'm one of those people. And not only was it confusing, I logged in every time with my email address and the password that was associated with the email address. But you can have the same email address associated with 2 passwords, and those are 2 different logins. And the bills were going to the one that I didn't remember I had. And I was like, where are the bills? Where's the invoices?
And it's not easy to kill the wrong account.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So yeah, do not try to register there. I'm not even admin in there. So if there's anything that I need or we need, we are going to ask Stefano. His account is really messed up. He doesn't care.
Well, I did get basic CI running in GitHub once. It didn't all pass, but CI is a little different. So I don't know. I could try again. A branch is still hanging out somewhere. It's not hard. It's all just work.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone, I don't want to layer more work on top of Youssef or anyone for that matter, but I think it is a worthwhile investment if someone wants to take some initiative here and just sort of try to set up what we have in Azure in GitHub Actions. I think we're pretty motivated to make that work. So if you find some small hiccups or there's like, a list of less than 10 things that we'd have to do to make it work, I'll at least volunteer to help out with that.
I'll try and dig up that branch. I don't know. As I said at the start of this meeting, the reality of pandemic times means I have less time and attention than I'd like. That's probably true for everyone, especially the parents here. So I apologize to everyone. I'm not as present as I used to be. So it's tough.
Yeah. Appreciate the time that you do commit. It's pretty invaluable.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Well, thank you all. And hey, someone else joined in the middle. Ben, you got any questions?
Sure. So I'm kind of working on a blog post here where I'm actually using GitLab to create a CI/CD pipeline, but not to build osquery, to push configs to Fleet. So the question I have is, I want to, during the CI/CD pipeline process, is make sure that the config I'm pushing to Fleet is a good config. So my question is, what type of tools do I have to ensure that? Right now, I'm using osquery I, passing it the config, and then doing the -- config check. Is there any other checks or tests that you guys would recommend that you've seen being used in the field? Maybe I should just go look at your CI/CD pipeline for this question.
I think the config check is going to give you a yes or no. Like, did you give it valid JSON? And did you hit some known invariants that we detect with the config? Like, for example, use the wrong JSON type in one area or another. So this is going to give you, I think that's the first check, and that's the first and best check. I think the probably check you're looking for, though, is more like, did I configure osquery as I intended it? And with that, you might have to string together some runtime checks, like let me select a little bit from this table and make sure it's working. Let me look at the meta tables, the osquery underscore tables, to make sure that the configuration options I want to set are there, and the things that they turn on and off have been turned on and off. So you might have to get a little bit creative.
Currently, I have a for loop which reads the JSON, just pulls out each query, and then just pipes that into osquery and makes sure that it at least doesn't fail. That's what I got going now.
I mean, I think it's worth noting that we as a project could do better on this front, and I think it would make it easier for people to adopt osquery because they'd run into fewer problems with thinking that they'd configured things and not actually achieving what they expected.
What do you envision that looking like, Zach?
Make config check do more, like maybe output what was recognized as valid configuration and output like a summary of the packs or queries detected or something like that. I don't know.
So I have a couple of thoughts. Bummer, Teddy left. Okay, so one of the random hack projects I started a while ago that I never finished was kind of a replacement for our Python test framework. So one of the things I really want to think about having a better answer for is like integration tests or like full end-to-end system tests. So I'd love to be able to say, here's a config file or a set of queries. I want to start a VM with osquery. I want to grab that config file. I want to run it. And I want to take the output from it. And I kind of mocked that all up in Go somewhere where basically like config files were config files and the verification of the output can be done with one of the JSON schema descriptor things, right? So you can say like select star from uptime is answer a number, right? And like I feel like that's kind of a gold standard in some ways. I haven't had time to go back to that work. I don't know if any of you are excited to pick that up. You might be at some point, Zach. It's Go code, so
Yeah, and I mean, I will say I've certainly considered approaches along those lines. If I were to do it, it would probably be tightly coupled with Fleet itself. But I think it could still absolutely have value to osquery in the community, and we could, I'd love to be able to build automation that could start testing nightly builds of osquery or that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So once, I think as we mostly know, if we build the tooling and the abstraction, it's not that hard to start doing things like that. So I'm on board. If you want to share what you've done, I'd be curious to see it. And if you'd like to collaborate, I'd be happy to. And I think that I will be getting to it with Fleet at some point regardless. And I'm happy to make sure that those results are valuable to the osquery org.
If I can dig up the thing I was working on. The other thought that I had, which is a little bit of a different direction, but maybe a simpler one, is one of the use cases I think that could exist for osquery that does not easily might exist today, is to be able to say, run osquery as a one-shot against a config file and get all of basically like, for this config file, just run these all on exit. Give me a big JSON blob of the output for everything here. And you could imagine that if you had that kind of mode, then you could say, well, here's my config file, just run it in osquery, and then you analyze your JSON output anyway. So that would probably be a feature I'd love to see, something like a one-shot mode. I forget if we have something like that already. So Ben, if you were excited to PR that.
We'll see. I don't know if I'm ready to dust off my C++ skills. And I just have one other follow-up question on my original question is, right now, my tests for the CI/CD pipeline are running in a Docker container, which means I can only test a Linux config. I haven't figured out, unless I spin up a Windows VM, how to test a Windows config inside like a Docker container. Is there no way to do it? You have to run it on the platform, I assume?
Correct.
All right, just wanted to ask.
I think you'll always have to, because you could do like schema verifications, but some things you can't do without hitting a native API.
I figured. I just wanted to ask the question. So.
Yeah, and Ben, it's a great question, and I want to be able to solve. I want to have a better answer for you, And I think that Fleet is going to be able to contribute to that because pushing all of this kind of stuff through CI is part of the philosophy that we want to push with Fleet and fleet control and everything. And so we need to better answer these questions. So, I'm happy to chat more with you about this, and we will be, at some point implementing things that can help more with this. I'm just not sure when we'll be able to prioritize it.
Okay. Well, thank you for your help.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Folks, I have to run, but if there's anything else, feel free.
Probably about everything. So thank you all. Hope you all have a wonderful 2021, or at least the 2 weeks of it until I see you again. So,
And you as well.
See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.